If you ever catch yourself judging a woman you have never known, I want you to imagine a flat stretch of land with no fence to lean against and no roof to promise kindness. Picture the sky the color of watered milk and a wind that keeps troubling the grass the way a nervous hand turns a rosary bead by bead. That is where I first understood how thin a person can become, how you can be reduced to breath and will and one single choice that follows you like a shadow that will not grow longer or shorter. I am an old woman now. My hands are knotted at the joints, and my hearing is not what it once was. Some days the names of the long dead hover just beyond my reach, and I must circle them like a bee circling a jar. But that day in the field, no, I do not lose that day. It rests inside me, with a sharpness that time has not softened. I could give you the scent of crushed wild onion beneath my palm. I could tell you how cold the earth felt through my skirt. I could tell you the sound I made when I tried hard not to make any sound at all. You may be wondering, how does a woman come to give birth alone in a field? And why does she speak of it, as if it were a sin or a prayer? I will not dress it up. I will not use the gentle words people prefer when they wish to keep their supper settled. You came to hear something true, and true things do not arrive tied with ribbons. Let me place myself before you, so you know I am not inventing a tale. I was born in the year 1842 on a patch of land outside a river town where the floods left the soil black and heavy. My father measured distance by how long it took a mule to sweat beneath its collar, and my mother measured it by how long bread needed to rise in winter. We were not poor in the way city folk speak of poverty with empty streets and crowds of the hungry. We were poor in a quieter way. Always one broken tool away from fear. Always one bad harvest away from leaving. When I speak to you like this, it is because there are fewer and fewer living mouths who can tell you what it meant to be a woman when your body was treated as a working part, like a churn or a plow. You did not expect a child the way ladies in novels do. You carried it. You watched your ankles, well, you kept on working, and you prayed your bones would hold. There were midwives, yes, and neighbor women with skilled hands, but they were not magic. They could only come if someone sent for them, and they could only be sent for if someone knew to send. That is the first hard truth. I was alone because I made myself alone, not from pride or stubbornness as you might think, but from the small lies women learned to tell, so the day kept moving forward. I told myself the cramps were only the kind that come from lifting wet laundry. I told myself it could wait until I finished what needed finishing. I told myself I would not be the girl who caused a scene, not again. And the longer you repeat a lie to your own mind, the more it begins to sound like plain sense. I should say this clearly as well. The child I carried was not my husband's. If that sentence strikes you like a blow, then let it wake you. Do not think I confess from some hunger for pardon. I am too old for that bargain. I tell you because every other detail hangs from that truth, like a coat from a single nail. My husband, Caleb, was a decent man by the measure of our time and place. He did not drink our money away. He did not raise his hand without what he believed was cause. He worked hard and expected hard work in return. That is what people called a good marriage then. Two bodies pulling the same load, with affection as a kind of weather that might come or might not. Caleb's care showed itself in useful forms: a mended harness, a roof patched before rain, wood chopped before the first frost. There are women who would have called themselves fortunate, and in a way I was. But blessing can sit beside loneliness and never notice it. The father of the child was a man who had no business standing close enough to me for such a thing to happen. I will not give you his name, not because I am shielding him. Dust claimed him long ago, but because names have a way of turning into excuses. If I name him, you will begin to build a story where he is the villain, and I am the foolish girl. The truth is more ordinary, and that is what makes it dangerous. He was a man who looked at me as if he saw the part of me that was not only wife, not only labor. I was hungry for that look in a way I did not understand until later, when it was too late to pretend I had not been hungry. When I realized I was carrying a child, I did what women did. I counted backward by moons and by church Sundays. I watched my body and waited for the monthly bleeding that did not arrive. I told myself it might simply be late. I told myself I had taken a chill. I told myself anything a woman can tell herself when she stands at the edge of a truth that will change her life. Then one morning I bent to lift a bucket and felt a heaviness settle in my belly. That was more than flesh. It was certainty. In our county, a married woman with a child, not her husband's, did not only face gossip. Gossip was the lightest part. She faced the church, which could turn its face away like a mother refusing a stubborn child. She faced men who would treat her shame as permission. She faced women who would look at her as if she were disease. And if she had a husband, she faced his honor, which people valued more than her breathing. You may ask why I did not run. Where would I have gone? A woman alone without money is not free. She is hunted. You may ask why I did not confess. I had seen confession ruin other women and mend nothing. I did not believe truth would rescue me. I believed it would only scatter harm into every corner of the life I had built. So I did what I could. I hid it. I bound myself tighter. I took on work that kept me bent, so my shape looked like strain instead of pregnancy. I ate less at table so no one would comment on my appetite. I chose loose aprons in dark cloth. Without meaning to, I became a woman made of watchfulness. And watchfulness, I learned, cannot stop a body from doing what it was created to do. The day it truly began, I was already outside before dawn. Moving because movement was how I kept fear from catching me. There had been days of rain and the mud, in the yard, clung to my shoes. I remember the cold, in the air, and the way my breath showed white, like smoke, from a small fire. I remember thinking foolishly that if I worked quickly enough, I could outrun whatever was gathering inside me. I could not. No one can. The first real pain came like a rope, pulled tight, low and deep, and I froze with my hands in a washtub, fingers wrinkled from cold water. I waited for it to pass. It did. I told myself I had imagined it. Then it came again, stronger, more certain, and this time it left a dampness on my skin that was not water. I set the laundry aside and turned toward the path to the field, because there was something I needed to fetch. What was it? A spool of twine, perhaps. Or maybe I only told myself it was twine, so I would have reason to be away from watchful eyes. Memory is honest in its feeling, if not always in its smallest details. What I know is that I chose distance. I chose open ground. I chose a place where no one would hear me, because the sound of a woman in labor is not easily forgotten. I walked with my hands pressed to my lower belly, as if I could hold the child inside by force. Each step shook my bones. The grass was wet with dew, and the air smelled of turned earth. The sky stayed that pale, pitiless color. Somewhere a crow cried out, and the sound made me think of graveyard soil. I reached a low place in the field, where the ground dipped, and weeds grew tall. There, hidden by stalks and space, the next pain took me and did not release me the same way. It moved through me like a wave that knew my name. I remember thinking with a strange calm, this is it. This is the moment I have been pushing away for months. And I remember another thought, colder and sharper. Whatever happens here will decide the rest of my life. That is where I will carry you next. Into the grass. Into the stubborn work of staying silent. Into the part of a woman's life that is both ordinary and unbearable. The weeds stood higher than my knee, stiff as broom straw, their seed heads dark with damp. I know this because when the pain bent me double, I reached out for something to hold and caught a stalk that snapped clean in my hand. It made me read that small betrayal from a plant. I needed the world to stay steady for a moment, and even the weeds would not obey. I tried to breathe the way I had heard women describe, slow and even, as if rocking a baby to sleep inside your own ribs. It is a fine idea, breathing. It sounds calm and civilized. But when the body decides to open, It does not ask permission from ideas. My breath turned rough and shallow, and each time the pain loosened, I felt sweat cooling on my back beneath my chemise. You should know what I had with me, because that is what a woman counts in such an hour. I had my skirt and petticoat, an apron, a shawl tied around my shoulders against the morning cold. In the pocket of my apron was a small knife, the kind used for twine and for cutting apples, and a handkerchief that still carried the faint smell of lye soap from the washwater. No clean sheets, no kettle of hot water, no warm hands, no one to say you are doing it right, only the sky and the field and my own stubborn will. I lowered myself to the ground because my legs trembled and because I had been taught, without anyone ever saying it plainly, that a woman should keep her troubles low. Sitting there in the wet grass, I could feel the earth solid beneath me, indifferent and steady, as the next wave of pain gathered itself, and Rose Dot hear the distant sounds of a farm waking. A rooster giving its rough complaint, a gate creaking somewhere, the heavy thud of something weighty set down. Those sounds did not soothe me. They made me feel as if life were continuing in another country, far from where I stood. There is a special kind of fear that comes when you realize you have misjudged the time. It is not like the fear of a storm you can see rolling in. It is more like stepping off a porch in the dark and finding no step under your foot. I had believed I still had weeks ahead. I had told myself at sea, old not be now, not here. But my body did not ask permission from my counting. I tried to stand and make my way back. God knows I tried, because my first instinct was still to hide, to reach home, to get behind walls and doors where I could at least be alone in a proper way. I managed perhaps a dozen steps before another contraction forced me to bend at the waist. One hand braced against my thigh. A low sound escaped me, and I bit the inside of my cheek to hold it back. I tasted blood and metal. The field did not care what sounds I made, but I cared deeply. Shame is a strange companion. It follows you even when no one is there to witness it. I looked toward the house, though it could not truly be seen from that dip in the land. In my mind, I saw it clearly. The plank walls, the smoke-darkened chimney, the yard churned with mud and straw. I could picture Caleb's back as he moved, shoulders squared, doing whatever morning task he always did. I imagined him turning, noticing I was gone, calling my name. Then I imagined what would happen if he found me in the field with my skirts lifted and a child between my legs, and my throat tightened so fiercely I could hardly breathe. That was when I knew I would not call out, not even if I believed I might die. People talk of bravery as if it is always noble. Sometimes it is only fear choosing the least painful shape. The pains grew closer together. Between them, I had moments of sharp clarity, like pockets of air, deep, underwater. In one of those moments I thought of my mother's hands, red and cracked from lye and cold, and how she had once said, almost like a joke, "A woman can do nearly anything if she must." At the time, I had laughed, because girls laugh at hard truths to pretend they are not afraid. Now alone in the tall weeds, I understood she had not been joking at all. I began to make whatever small preparations I could. I spread my shawl on the ground as best I was able, though the grass pushed up beneath it and made uneven lumps. I pulled my skirt up and tucked the cloth into my waistband, clumsy with shaking hands. The air touched me in places, never meant for open air, and it made me gasp. I folded my handkerchief and placed it near my knee. I took out the knife and set it on the shawl where I could reach it without searching. I remember thinking with a kind of grim practicality that if I fainted and woke later, I did not want to be hunting for the blade in the grass. The next contraction did not feel like the others. It felt as though my whole body had turned into a fist. I bore down because something inside me pushed, and it was no longer a choice. I pressed my heels into the earth and tried not to slip. Mud smeared against my soles. The smell of soil rose strong and alive, and mixed with the sharp salt scent of my sweat. Time began to behave strangely. There were minutes that stretched long and then disappeared. I remember seeing beads of moisture on a spiderweb between two stalks and thinking foolishly how beautiful they looked. I remember a bee settling on a wildflower and working calmly as if nothing in the world were wrong. That calm nearly broke me. I wanted to shout at the bee, at the sky, at God himself. Do you not see what is happening? I pressed my palm low against myself and felt something that was not my own flesh, as I had known it, a rounded hardness, a pressure that made my vision flicker at the edges. Panic surged up, hot and sudden, and for a moment I could not think. Then another thought, steadier, came in like a firm hand on my shoulder. You are already in it. Panic will not lift the weight, so I forced myself to listen to my body the way you listen to a horse about to bolt, steady, alert, without softness. I waited for the next wave and tried to meet it, instead of fleeing from it. I counted in my head, not numbers as a schoolteacher would, but words, now and again, and hold and release. My mouth kept shaping silent prayers. I did not fully believe, because belief mattered less than the rhythm of asking. And through it all, there was that other thread in my mind, the one I could not cut away. What would I do when the child arrived? Not in a gentle, sentimental way, but in a harsh survival way. The decision was not waiting somewhere in the future. It was already sitting beside me in the weeds, patient as a snake. A stronger urge seized me, and I felt my body open wider than I believed a body could open without tearing apart. I gripped the shawl so tightly my fingers cramped. Somewhere higher in the field, a gust moved through the grass and made it hiss. That sound, that simple sound, was the only witness I had when I felt the first true descent, the beginning of the child's coming. I leaned back on my elbows, eyes fixed on the pale sky, and at last I whispered aloud, words meant for no one, except whatever part of me could still hear them. Stay with me, stay with me. When I whispered those words, I meant them for my own mind, as much as for my body, because the mind in pain tries to climb out of the body like a frightened cat, scrambling up a curtain. I felt mine doing it, slipping toward emptiness, toward the temptations, not to be present for what was happening. But I had heard too many stories spoken in low voices over quilting frames about women who drifted away in labor and did not return. So I anchored myself to the small facts around me. The grass tips, shining, with damp, a strip of black soil split by last week's plow, the edge of my apron string biting into my waist. I told myself this stalk, this scent, this cold air, these are real, so you are real, and you must remain. The next contraction lifted me clean out of an softness I had left. I bore down hard enough that my throat made a sound I could not swallow, a raw animal cry. I clapped my hand over my mouth at once, as if I could force the sound back inside. Then I understood how foolish that was. There was no one there to scold me for noise. Still, the habit of silence had deep roots in me. Quiet had protected me before. I believed it might protect me again. I shifted my hips on the shore, searching for a position that did not feel as though it would tear me in half. I had once seen a cow calve, and I hated myself for thinking of it, but the mind grabs at any comparison it can find. The cow had labored and strained. And then at last the calf had slipped free into straw. I had been a girl then, standing behind a fence rail, thinking only how wet and startled the calf appeared. I never imagined I would envy the cow for having a barn, for having someone nearby with a pail of warm water. I reached down again, fingers shaking, and touched the crown of a head, or what I believed was a head, hair slick and fine. That touch stirred something deep inside me. Fear, yes, but also a fierce tenderness. The child was no longer an idea. It was a living being pushing into the world through my own flesh. Easy, I whispered. Another foolish thing, as if a newborn could take direction before taking breath, but speaking steadied me. My voice sounded strange in that wide-open place, swallowed by grass and sky. I waited for the next wave. It came quickly, with little mercy between. I bore down and felt burning, the kind that makes your eyes sting and your teeth clench tight. I thought, this is where women tear. This is where they die. Then I thought, no, not today. Not here. Not with no one. Even to close my eyes, I tried to remember any scrap of midwife's talk I had overheard. Warm cloths, clean hands, keep the baby's nose clear, tie the cord. I had one of the proper things, but I had my own 2 hands. The handkerchief, the knife, and the stubborn will that had carried me through winters when the corn bin looked too shallow. Another contraction rose like a tide, and with it came a feeling I can only call release, a terrible loosening, like a knot finally giving way after being pulled and pulled. The head slipped farther. I felt it move, then pause, then move again. My body worked in its own rhythm, and I was both inside it and watching from somewhere far away, as if I were already an old woman remembering. When the head was out, I panted as though I had run uphill. I did not feel relief, only a new fear. What if the shoulder caught? I had heard of that too, women saying the baby would not come and later no baby crying. I pressed my heels into the mud and waited once more. I did not push until my body demanded it. Then I pushed with everything still left in me. There was a slick sliding, a sudden lightness, and the rest of the child spilled into the world, wet and warm and shockingly heavy in my trembling hands. For a single heartbeat, there was no sound at all, no cry, not even a weak protest. The silence was so complete, it pressed against my ears. I lifted the child close to my face, blinking sweat from my eyes. The skin looked bluish, the limbs drawn tight. A cord pulsed between us like a living rope. I did not scream. I could not. I rubbed the child's back with my palm, firm rather than gentle, the way you rub warmth into frozen fingers. I wiped at the mouth with my handkerchief, trying to clear whatever blocked it. I tilted the small head carefully, praying I was not causing harm. My own breath came in harsh pulls. Then a thin sound, a startled scraping cry, like a kitten's first mewl. It grew stronger, turned into a true wail, and I began to sob without noise, tears slipping into my hairline. I pressed my first head against the child's damp scalp. The hair smelled of iron and milk not yet formed, of something ancient and brand new at once. "It is all right," I whispered, though nothing was truly all right. "You are here. You are here." I looked, because I needed to know. A girl, small, but not impossibly small. Her fingers opened and closed, searching for something to grasp. I wrapped her in the shawl, pulling it close to shield her skin from the wind. My own body still labored behind me, the afterpains like a dragon twisting inside, the sudden rush that left me feeling emptied out. Blood soaked the edge of the shawl and marked my skirt. I pressed my thighs together and rocked gently, trying to keep the baby warm while my body finished its grim work. The afterbirth came with a slick heaviness, and I gagged at the scent, sweet and metallic. I used the handkerchief again, now filthy, and I longed for water so badly my mouth ached. Flies began to circle us. I waved them away with the back of my wrist, anger sparking. Even insects wanted their share. Then there was the cord. It lay between us, pale and thick, still faintly pulsing. I had seen cords cut before, always with clean thread and steady hands. I had neither. My knife was sharp enough for twine, not for holy things. But I could not remain tied to my child in that field forever. I waited until the pulsing slowed as I had once heard you should, then tore a strip from my apron hem with trembling fingers, twisting it into a rough tie. I knotted it around the cord near the baby's belly, as tight as I dared. Then I tied another knot a little closer to me. My hands did not feel like my own. They felt like tools being used by someone else. I lifted the knife and held it ready. For one long second I could not move. The blade looked too bright. My child's cries rose and fell, her face reddening with anger at the cold whirl. I swallowed and cut between the knots. The cord parted with a soft, wet resistance I will never forget. When it was done, I leaned back shaking and stared at her, a living girl, breathing and crying, wrapped in my shawl. My body throbbed and leaked. my legs numb from crouching so long. The sky above had grown lighter, the pale milk color thinning into a weak blue. The wind kept stirring the grass, hissing its careless hymn, and then, as the first shock eased, something else rushed in to fill its place. The thing that had been waiting beside me all along. What would I do now? Because giving birth alone in a field was not, in truth, the hardest part. The hardest part was what came after, when I had to stand with blood still running down my legs and decide what kind of woman I would be for the rest of my life. I sat there with her bundled against my chest and felt the world tilt, as if the field itself had shifted and I had to learn new balance. My thighs shook when I tried to pull my knees up. The muscles in my belly fluttered and clenched in small after grips, and each one brought a fresh warmth of blood that made my skin crawl. I remember the strange contrast of it, the baby's heat, fierce and pure, pressed to my ribs, and the cold air licking the damp places between my legs. Her crying frightened me most at first, not because I did not want her to cry, but because sound travels. A field seems empty until you put a human voice into it. Then you realize how far it can carry, how it can skim over the ground like a thrown stone. I covered her mouth for an instant, out of reflex, then pulled my hand away, horrified at myself. She needed air, not my fear. "Hush," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Hush, little one." I did not know any proper lullaby. I only knew work songs and hymns, and even those came to me in pieces. So I rocked her and rocked myself, as if movement could smooth away consequence. The grass around us was crushed in a rough circle from my shifting, and the shawl, my one good thing, was stained dark in places. My handkerchief was beyond saving. I thought of my house, of the clean corner where I kept my mending, and a flash of bitterness rose so hot it nearly gave me strength. All those years scrubbing and boiling and wringing, and here I was half naked in the dirt, doing the most important work of my life with rags and a pocket knife. I tried to stand. I made it halfway up, and the ground swayed. A cold sweat broke across my lip. I sank back down, breath whistling in my chest. There was a moment, only a small one, when I wondered if I might simply lie down and let the day take me. It would have been easy to stop struggling. Easy, and in a twisted way clean. No explanations, no courthouse, no church elders, no Caleb's face turning hard as stone. But then the baby hiccuped, a tiny helpless jerk, and my whole mind snapped back into my body. I am not telling you this as a heroine. I did not rise in that field and suddenly become good. I rose and became practical. Practicality is the mother of many sins, and also of survival. I looked at her again, truly looked. Her eyelids were swollen, her nose flattened from the passage, her mouth searching. The cord stump at her belly was tied with my torn apron strip, rough and ugly. She was mine, in a way nothing else had ever been mine. And she was also proof that could undo me. I thought of Caleb first, because a wife thinks of her husband first in our kind of life, not only from love, though love was there like a thin thread, but from calculation. He would look at her and count months in his head the way he counted Faye. Ed Sachs, he would know. Men are not fools about such matters when their pride is at risk. Then I thought of the man whose eyes had made me weak. With that thought came anger, sharp as the knife I had used. Not only at him, but at myself. At the whole crooked order where a woman's body could be judged as property and evidence in the same breath. The wind shifted and carried the smell of manure from some distant lot. It steadied me. It reminded me the world did not pause for moral knots. Somewhere a bell would ring for dinner later. Somewhere children would be sent to fetch water. Somewhere butter would need churning whether I lived or died. I began to plan in fragments because my mind could not yet hold a whole plan. First, I could not bring her home to my house. Second, I could not leave her in that field to die. Whatever else I might become, I could not do that. The thought made bile rise in my throat. I had seen dead babies before, tiny coffins, the dull weight of that grief. Even in my fear, I could not choose that ending with my own hands. So what remained? A third path people did not speak of openly, yet everyone knew it existed like a back room in a respectable house. In our county there were women, quiet women with hard eyes, who took in babies born of trouble. They did it for money if money could be found, or from duty, or because they had lost their own and could not bear another empty cradle. Sometimes a preacher's wife arranged it through whispers and folded notes. Sometimes it was done through a midwife who knew how to keep her face smooth. The child would be said to be an orphan or a cousin's, or brought from another town. Lies stacked like firewood. But to use that hidden door, I had to carry her to someone who would take her. And I had to do it without being seen holding a newborn, wrapped in my shawl like a stolen loaf. I hugged her closer and listened. Ned. The farm sounds had grown clearer. A wagon, creaking, a man calling to a horse, the faint clang of a bucket. Morning had fully begun. If I waited too long, someone would enter the fields to work. If I moved too quickly, my legs might fail, and I might drop her. Hooray! I forced myself to breathe as if it were medicine, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Slowly I pressed my palm between my legs, wincing at the soreness, and adjusted the shawl so her face remained uncovered. She had quieted, the storm of her first cries spent for the moment. Her mouth made small sucking motions. She wanted milk I could not yet give. Listen, I told her, as if she could understand. I am going to get you warm. I am going to get you fed. I am going to do one thing right, even if I never do another. The promise felt like a nail driven into wood. Something firm to hold. I pushed myself up again, slower this time, bracing on my knee. The world tilted but did not collapse. My legs trembled as if they belonged to someone twice my age. I took one step, then another, each step a careful bargain with pain. Blood slid down my inner thigh, cooling in the air. I clenched my teeth and kept moving. I did not head toward my house. Instead, I turned along the low edge of the field, keeping to the dip where weeds could hide me. There was a stand of cottonwoods near the creek, and beyond that, a rough track leading to the back of the churchyard. Not the front path where people came and went, but the narrow way used for hauling wood, and sometimes for burying what no one wished to mention. I held one name in my mind, Sister Agnes Crowley, the midwife. She was not a nun. People called her sister because she spoke with a kind of holy authority, and because she had buried more babies than she had baptized. She lived in a small cabin behind her son's house, and accepted payment in eggs, in cloth, in whatever could be spared. She also knew how to guard a secret when it suited her sense of order. If I could reach Agnes unseen, I might keep my life from breaking in public. I might place my child into another woman's arms, and walk away with my face still arranged as a wife. It sounds cruel when I say it plainly. It was cruel, and in that moment it was the only way I could see to keep the baby alive and keep Caleb from destroying us both. So I walked, step by step, through grass that brushed my calves, and through a wind that seemed to murmur, "Go on, go on." The baby's weight was light yet absolute. My arms ached. My body felt hollowed out. Yet my mind was crowded with one question I could not answer. Would she one day hate me for what I was about to do? The cottonwoods came into sight, their branches dark against the brightening sky, and with them the cool green smell of the creek. I fixed my eyes on that line of trees, as if it were a doorway, and I told myself I was not abandoning her. I was carrying her toward life. I was choosing her future over my own safety, even if I had to cut my heart open to do it. And as I drew closer to the creek, I heard a voice near enough to make the hair rise along my neck, calling out to a horse, sharp and known to me. A man stood on the track ahead. I stopped so suddenly my knees almost gave out. The baby shifted in my arms and let out a small, offended grunt, as if even she could feel that danger was near. I pulled the shawl tighter around her and pressed my cheek to her forehead, pretending it was a loving touch and not a way to quiet any sound that might give us away. The voice was Ezra Pritchard's. He was a neighbor in the wide meaning of the word. wide enough to include anyone within a long walk along the same creek. Ezra hauled timber when there was timber to haul, and did small jobs the rest of the year. He had a habit of singing hymns when he was alone, loud and off-key, as if he believed being louder could fix a weak tune. I knew his wagon too. One back wheel had an iron band that struck against a loose nail, a ringing sound you could pick out from far away, once you had heard it enough times. I could not let him see me, not because Ezra was cruel, because Ezra was the kind of man who talked, not in a mean way, just because words poured out of him the way grain spills from a torn sack. A man like that could destroy you without ever meaning to do harm. I stepped sideways into the weeds, sinking into that low dip of land, like a creature that belonged there. The grass brushed my face. It smelled sharp and damp. I held my breath and listened. Ezra's wagon creaked closer. I heard the horse snort, then the clop as it shifted its footing near the creek crossing. Ezra muttered to the animal, then spat. The sound of it hitting the mud was clear as a slap in the still air. My heart beat so hard I thought it might wake the baby into a full cry. In that moment a thought came to me quick and cold. If he sees the child, everything ends. Not someday. Now. The field. The secret. My marriage. My life as I knew it. Caleb's face rose in my mind. Not angry yet, but blank. Which was worse. A blank face is a door that has already been shut. Ezra began to hum. His tune wandered like a drunk man. He was close enough now that if I lifted my head, I might see his boots resting on the wagon board. The baby opened her mouth. I felt her tiny jaw move against my collarbone. I prayed, not with polite church words, just with raw need. Don't. She made a sound anyway, a soft little bleat. More a question than a cry. Ezra's humming stopped. The horse stamped once. Ezra said, "What in the—" My blood turned to ice. I pressed my shaking hand over the baby's back and pulled her tighter into the fold of the shawl. Careful not to cover her face. I tried to make myself smaller than a woman can be. Ezra shifted on the wagon seat. Leather creaked. I could hear him leaning forward, listening. "Hello," he called. Not loud, but the words sliced through the grass like a blade. I did not answer. He waited. The creek bubbled softly. A crow called from somewhere behind him. Then again, as if mocking my silence. And then, by some mercy, I still do not fully understand, Ezra laughed under his breath. "A lamb," he said, as if he had solved a small puzzle. Must have slipped out again. He clicked his tongue at the horse. The wagon jolted forward. The loose iron band gave its ugly little ring. The sound faded one beat at a time, until it was swallowed by distance and wind. Only then did I allow myself to breathe. I stayed crouched in the weeds, long after he was gone, because fear has its own aftershocks. My legs cramped. My arms burned from holding the baby so tight. When I finally moved, my muscles protested like old rope pulled too hard. The baby's eyes, blue-gray and unfocused, blinked up at me. She was not crying now. She looked, in her newborn way, as if she had already learned something about silence. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm sorry for dragging you into my fear." That was the first time I said sorry to her. It would not be the last. When I stood again, the world seemed brighter, the sky more open, as if daring me to be seen. I walked slower, keeping to the low ground, measuring my steps between the sharper pains in my belly. Each jolt sent a sour taste into my throat. I knew I needed water soon, but I could not stop at the creek like any sensible person. I could not risk being seen bent over the bank with a baby at my breast, like some wild creature, so I kept walking with my tongue dry and my throat tight. The churchyard came into sight through the trees, its fence uneven, posts leaning, as if tired. Behind it ran the narrow track I had meant to take. I followed it, my boots slipping in soft patches, until I reached the stand of sumac that hid the path to Agnes Crowley's cabin. Her place was plain. A low building of rough boards with a stone chimney set back from her son's larger house. Smoke curled lightly from the chimney, which meant she was awake and had a fire going. That small sign, smoke, felt like rescue. I came from the side, staying out of the open yard. My heart pounded again, this time with urgency instead of pure fear. I could not knock like a caller. I could not walk up bold as daylight. So I did what women did when they needed help without witnesses. I went to the back door and tapped in a pattern. 2 quick knocks, 1 slow. Something Agnes had once told me to use, if ever I was in trouble. The door opened a crack. Agnes's face appeared, lined and alert. Her grey hair was pinned back tight. Her eyes took me in at once. My muddy hem, my stiff posture, the blood on the shawl. Then her gaze dropped to the bundle in my arms. For a long moment, she said nothing. The fire behind her popped softly. I smelled wood smoke and something simmering. Maybe herb tea. At last she spoke, low and flat. "Lord have mercy," she murmured. Not as a prayer, but as a judgment. "Agnes," I said, and my voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. I swallowed because the words felt heavy. "I need you to take her just for a little while. I will pay you. I will." Agnes opened the door wider. "Come in before you fall," she said. Inside the cabin it was warm in a way that made my skin sting where it had been cold. Agnes shut the door and turned her sharp eyes back to the baby. She did not reach for her yet. Instead, she studied my face as if reading an account book. "Is your husband aware?" she asked. "No," I said. "And you plan to keep it that way?" I nod. The dead ones. I could not trust my voice. Agnes drew in a slow breath through her nose. "Sit," she ordered, pointing to a chair near the hair, "and listen to me. If you are going to do what I think you are about to do, you will do it clean, and you will do it quick. The longer you hesitate, the more people suffer." The baby squirmed. A thin cry began. Agnes's mouth tightened. At last she held out her arms. "Give her here," she said. There was no softness in her tone, but there was a kind of firm skill that made my chest ache. I lowered the bundle into her hands, careful and almost reverent. For one heartbeat, our fingers touched, my skin cold and sticky with blood, hers dry and warm from the fire. The moment the baby left my arms, my body understood what my mind had refused to see. My knees weakened. I grabbed the back of the chair to keep from falling. A sound came out of me, low and broken, the noise of something tearing without any blood. Agnes adjusted the shawl, checked the cord tie with practiced fingers, then looked at me again. "Now," she said, "tell me the truth I need. Not all of it. Just enough to keep you alive. When did you deliver? Out where?" "In the field," I said. "This morning, alone." Agnes's eyes moved to my skirt, to the stains, to the way I stood. "And you walked here," she said, as if testing the truth of it. "Yes." She made a small sound, disapproval and respect, mixed together. Then she turned, set the baby in a rough cradle, a box lined with old cloth, near the warmth of the hearth, and came back with a cup of water. "Drink," she said. "Then we will talk about what you can do and what you cannot do, because once a choice like this is made, it does not sit still. It keeps moving." I took the cup with trembling hands. The water tasted of tin and smoke. It slid down my throat like a blessing I had not earned. As the baby's cries softened near the fire, Agnes Crowley's next words fell on me like a stone. "Do you want her raised by strangers?" she asked. "Or do you want her placed where she will be called someone else's, proper and legal, with papers and preaching and lies that hold?" Her question hung between us like smoke from the fire, thin but choking. Proper meant permanent. It meant trading truth for safety, a choice that could never be undone. I stared into the rim of the cup, watching the water tremble with the pulse in my wrist. The baby gave a small sigh from the cradle, her mouth forming a perfect circle as if tasting the air. Even that tiny sound made Agnes glance her way with something between pity and calculation. "I don't know," I said at last. "I only know I cannot take her home." Agnes nodded once, neither approving nor condemning. "Then you rest here an hour," she said. "I will see to the child. After that, you can decide if you mean to walk away, or pay me to find her a roof." The words "walk away" stuck in my throat. They sounded simple, like stepping away from a broken cart or a quarrel. But flesh does not empty like a bucket. Flesh remembers. Agnes moved with the quiet purpose of someone who has witnessed too much to be surprised. She removed my ruined apron, found clean rags, and pressed folded cloth between my legs to slow the bleeding. Heat from the hearth reached my numb ankles, prickling like pins. Every nerve in my body seemed to wake and protest at once. "Drink more," she ordered. "Shock will steal your sense if you let it. Shock will steal your sense if you let it." I obeyed, because obedience was easy, and because my strength had left me. Now that another pair of hands held the baby, the relief was heavy, almost shameful. My arms ached, not from longing, but from the sudden lack of weight. Outside, I heard men's voices in the distance. Her son most likely talking with a farm worker. Every rise and fall of their voices reminded me that life went on no matter what I had done. I thought somewhere Caleb is eating his breakfast. Maybe he wonders where I have gone. Maybe he does not. Agnes came back carrying a bowl of warm water. She made me wash the blood from my thighs, the dirt from my forearms. The water turned pink, then brown. "You will live," she said in a plain tone, like a midwife giving a verdict, "but you will carry the mark of it for some time. No hiding that from a husband's eyes." "I can say I slipped," I whispered. "You can say anything, child," she answered, wringing out the cloth. "The trick is saying it steady." "Child," she called me that even though I was past 30. It struck me how many women never grow beyond being called someone's child, never gain a word that belongs only to them. After a while, I pushed myself upright and watched her care for the baby. She moved without rush, changed the shawl for a clean piece of flannel, rubbed the tiny limbs with drops of warm tallow, checked the cord. The baby's skin grew deeper pink with every touch. "She is strong," Agnes said, almost unwilling to admit it. "A fighter like her mother, whether you like that truth or not." The word "mother" hit me harder than any pain. I looked away toward the window where sunlight rested on shelves of jars filled with roots and herbs. Something unknown floating in cloudy liquid. The smell of dried sage covered the sour scent of blood. "What happens if I pay you?" I finally asked. Agnes did not turn around. "It depends what kind of life you want her to have. There is a family west, near the ridge. They lost a baby last winter. They would take her as their own if I speak the right words. Or I can place her with a woman in town who nurses babies for wages. Then she would grow up knowing she was a boarder, not blood. Either way, she gets milk and a bed. You get silence." Her blunt words emptied the room of air. My heart began to beat again, slow and heavy. "How much?" I whispered. Agnes named a price that sounded both small and impossible. I reached into my dress pocket and pulled out the small linen pouch I kept for emergency coins. Caleb's egg money, really. I had planned to spend some of it on lamp oil the next week. The coins clinked against her palm like a confession. She closed her fingers over them. "I will see to it," she said. "But listen to me, girl. You cannot come asking later, not even to look. Once this door closes, it stays closed." Her words cut straight through me. No looking, no name, no trace. I nodded because there was nothing else I could do. The decision had to live somewhere, and it had chosen me. Agnes turned back to the baby. "She will need a name to carry," she said. "You give it, or I will." For a moment, my mind was empty. Then, without thinking, I said, "May." It was the month when wild violets bloom, the month when everything pretends to be innocent. "May," Agnes repeated, as if testing the sound. All right then. She pulled the cradle closer to the fire and began to hum under her breath, something slow and without tune but steady. I realized she was trying to calm me as much as the child. The warmth, the soft humming, the deep exhaustion, all of it pulled me into a light sleep. I dreamed of walking through rows of dry corn, hearing an infant crying behind me, but never turning around. When I woke with a start, sunlight had climbed higher up the wall. Agnes stood by the door, her cloak pinned, a basket in her hand. "I am going now," she said. "Her new mother lives close enough that I can return before dark. You will wait here until your legs are strong enough to carry you." She spoke it as a fact, not a request. I tried to stand. I should. "No," she said sharply, "you should not." With the baby stirred at the sound and gave a soft cry. That one small cry was enough to break me. I reached toward the cradle, then stopped halfway, ashamed of my own weakness. My hands hovered in the air. Useless. "Go on," Agnes said more gently. "Say what you need to say." I bent over the cradle. May's tiny hand brushed my finger, a brief surprising grip, stronger than I expected. Her eyes blinked once, unfocused, but bright with the reflection of firelight. She had no idea who I was, not yet. "I do not ask for forgiveness," I whispered, "only for you to live." I let go before my courage failed, before the part of me that wanted to grab her and run could win. The baby's cries grew muffled in the cloth. She opened the door. Daylight poured in like judgment. "Close your eyes," Agnes said. "It will be easier." I did. I listened to her footsteps fade along the path, to the creak of the basket handle, to the silence that followed. I did not cry, not then. I sat beside the dying fire and folded my stained hands in my lap, already practicing the story I would tell when I walked back, that I had felt ill, that I had slept late, that nothing unusual had happened in the fields that morning. But no matter how carefully a woman builds her lies, she carries the truth in her walk. When I finally stepped outside, the sun struck my face like a slap. The air smelled of damp earth and lilac. I began the walk home, back straight and silent, every step taking me farther from the child who had already begun to forget the sound of my heart. The road home looked completely different on the return. Ever. Why fence post and furrow seemed to belong to another life, one I had left without permission. My body still moved by habit, one foot and then the next, but it felt borrowed, as if the ground was unsure whether to hold me. I avoided the main path and cut along the hedge, where birds flew up at every rustle in the leaves. The morning had turned into full sunlight by the time I saw the roof of our house. A thin line of smoke rose from the chimney. Caleb had already lit a small fire for his dinner bread. The normal sight of it hit me like a stone to the chest. I paused at the fence, wiped my hands on my skirt, then pressed them to my cheeks to cool the heat rising there. My palms still smelled of iron and smoke. No amount of rubbing them on moss could change that. When I stepped into the yard, the dog barked once, paused, then wagged his tail in uncertainty. Even he sensed a difference in me. Caleb came out from the shed doorway with a hammer in his hand. His face was calm and familiar. That frightened me too. "You took your time," he said, not unkindly. "I thought maybe you went by the creek." "I did," I lied smoothly, keeping my breath steady. "I needed some air." He studied me for a moment. Not suspicious yet, only the way a man studies the sky. Then he nodded toward the wash line. "You finished the laundry." "Not all," I said. Clouds were gathering. Thought it best to leave it. He glanced up at the bright sky. "Ham." After a short pause, he shrugged. "Suit yourself." That was the first test passed. It should not have felt like victory, but a small, ashamed part of me measured every word for survival, the way soldiers count bullets. The rest of the day moved in a blur of ordinary chores. I baked bread. I stitched Caleb's torn sleeve. I sat at the table while he talked about a neighbor's new foal. I nodded at the right times. Inside, my body ached with hollow throbs that felt both real and ghost-like. Each pain reminded me of what I had done, what I had carried, what I no longer carried. That first night I dreamed I heard the cry again. It was faint, like wind moving through reeds, yet it pierced my skull and pulled me from sleep. I sat upright, heart pounding. Caleb shifted beside me and muttered something about coyotes. I clutched the blanket to my chest and whispered that he was right. Yes, coyotes roaming. But in my throat the word May trembled without sound. Weeks passed and the season grew greener. Neighbors came and went. No one called me changed. My secret stayed stitched behind my calm face. Only my body betrayed me. Milk came without warning. The ache and dampness followed. Small betrayals of nature. I bound myself tight and turned away from the mirror. I began to see shadows of May everywhere. By the well, a neighbor's infant wrapped in a blanket. At church, the wail of someone else's baby echoing in the rafters. Each sound pulled through me like wire dragged across stone. I learned to smile without blinking. I learned to fold my hands until my knuckles turned white. Then, months later, when harvest arrived, rumors came as they always do, half-truths carried by women whispering to one another. Someone said that old Agnes Crowley had taken in a foundling. No one cared much. Such things happen quietly and often. The poor orphan had been taken in by a decent family. They called it a blessing. I kept my eyes on my needle when I heard that. My fingers bled where I pressed the thread too hard. But my voice stayed even. They swallow everything except what you most wish to forget. Every season after that carried a reminder in some new shape. A pair of tiny shoes I mended for a neighbor's girl. The sight of a mother brushing crumbs from her child's hair. The smell of milk boiling over. None of these things kill Demi, but each kept the wound from closing. Caleb never suspected, or if he did, he chose silence. Perhaps he valued peace more than truth. We grew gray together the way couples do when habit becomes the softest kind of mercy. Our talk turned to weather and crops, not dreams. There were winters when laughter returned for a short while around the stove, as we shared old stories. But even then, something in his voice stayed far away. When war reached our state, one of those endless conflicts that take sons and rarely return them, Caleb's 2 nephews left. I sent food parcels, stitched bandages, prayed with the other women at church. Every candle I lit, I pretended it was for those boys, though a quiet part of me always whispered another name. Time blurred until the children I once knew grew into adults who called me Aunt Ellen. Time blurred until the children I once knew grew into adults who called me Aunt Ellen. I never corrected them. It was easier to be a harmless aunt. Easier than remembering the cry that had once stopped in my arms so many years before. Then, one spring, nearly 15 years after that morning, a woman came into the yard selling sewing thread. Her hair was dark, her eyes bright, and something in the way she held herself made my heart forget how to beat .bi right like smooth glass. She said she lived west over the ridge on a farm owned by the Slater family, the same name Agnes had once mentioned. When she smiled, something known flickered behind her face, a kind of easy bravery. I asked her age out of simple politeness. She said 16. My hands became still. She did not notice. She spoke happily about the weather, about her ride from town, about her ma and pa. Her voice carried that mix of pride and wonder young people wear when the world still feels mostly safe. When she left, I found myself standing by the gate, long after the dust from her horse had settled back to the ground. A sound tried to rise in my throat, but it found no form. That night, I told Caleb a false story about a sore tooth, so I could walk alone to the churchyard. I knelt in the far corner where no one does at dusk, and pressed my palms against the wet earth. I did not say her name out loud. It felt like trespassing, but I thought it so fiercely I almost expected the ground to answer me. Days went by. The world forgot that moment, as the world always does. But I lived in a different way after that. Something inside me softened. though not fully. I began to greet neighbors instead of only nodding at them. I caught myself humming again while I baked. The song had no clear tune, only breath moving with motion. It surprised me how ordinary forgiveness can appear, how it comes quietly like the first frost that does not kill the last flowers, but tells them their time is almost finished. I believed that was the end of it. I thought silence would hold until another 20 years passed, and my hair turned silver, and I spoke more to ghosts than to living people. That is when I learned stories do not lie still either. They grow restless the way secrets grow heavy. Women die, and the silence dies with them, unless someone stubborn chooses to speak. So I began writing letters no one would ever read, setting down what memory could still reach before it faded away. One of them began very simply. I was born in the year 1842, and one morning I gave birth alone, in a field. I never meant to send those letters anywhere. I only wanted the truth to exist somewhere outside my bones. But the day I sealed the last letter and left it on the kitchen table, I felt the same shaking I had once felt in the grass, the same sense that what comes next will not ask permission, and that child, whoever you are reading or listening, is why I am speaking now. Because there is one more thing to tell, one thing that changed everything again, long after I believed the past was finished with me. I did not expect her to return, not after all those years, not after I had learned to live among ghosts instead of faces. But time is not tidy. It hides what you cannot bear, then one day sets it before you again, as if nothing has changed. The summer I turned 84. Sickness came into my bones the way winter comes to trees. I could still walk to the garden, still warm the house with a small fire, but the nights grew long and narrow. The doctor said my heart was strong for my age, which is only another way of saying the body has not yet caught up with the soul. Alone in that crooked house, I began speaking out loud, telling the walls the same story they had already heard 1,000 times. The story of the field, the wind, the choice. The story that had been waiting for ears other than my own. One afternoon, as the sun leaned low, a horse struck its hooves against my gate. At first, I thought it must be the preacher's boy coming to deliver flowers. But when I reached the porch, I saw a woman stepping down from the saddle. She wore a traveler's coat, plain yet neat. Her hair had changed from black to a deep brown touched with silver threads. When she turned, the shape of her jaw rang through me like a bell. "I hope I am not intruding," she said. "They told me you live alone now." Her voice was steady and low, but there was a small tremble under it. The tremble of someone repeating words she had practiced for many years. I held the doorframe to steady myself. "You are not intruding," I said, "though I admit my memory does not reach your name." She gave a faint smile. "They call me May Slater." She gave a faint smile. "They call me May Slater," she said. All the air in the yard seemed to disappear. My knees weakened. I had imagined this meeting 1,000 ways. A knock, a letter, a dream. But imagination is thin compared to the living weight of a person standing before you. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the soft creak of saddle straps shifting in the heat. I believe I managed to say, "You must come inside." She followed me, bending slightly through the low doorway, her boots dropping dust onto the worn rug. I motioned for her to sit, but first she looked around the small room, her eyes moving over the stove, the narrow bed, the jars of dried herbs. Perhaps she recognized the shape of something she did not know. She remembered the smell of wood smoke, the sound of a kettle, the quiet of loneliness. "I have heard your name all my life," she said gently. "Mrs. Ellen Harper. People said you once helped Sister Crowley many years ago. My mother spoke of her, the midwife who fetched me." She lifted her eyes to mine. The careful calm I had carried for 40 years cracked apart. "Fetched you," I repeated, the word catching in my throat. "That is what I was told," she said, though lately I have wondered if she fetched me, or if she found me. The light outside had turned honey-colored. Dust moved slowly in the air. I sat across from her, my hands shaking in my lap. "Why come now?" I asked after a long pause. "I did not know until last winter," she said. "Agnes's son passed away." They sorted through his papers. There was a note folded among them. Written in her hand, it said, "The child called May belongs to the woman east of the creek. Name withheld for mercy." When I read it, I could not breathe. "I came to ask if it means what I think it means." Her voice did not accuse me. It only waited. I could have lied. I had spent almost a lifetime shaping lies that looked like silence. But there are mom ends when silence begins to rot inside you. "Yes," I said at last. She closed her eyes. The breath she let out seemed to lift an unseen weight between us. She sat very still, not crying, not smiling, only breathing as if she were learning the air again. I told her the rest then. The sorrow, the field, the fear, the choice. Not every detail. The sorrow, the field, the fear, the choice. But enough that she could understand what kind of woman I had been, and what sort of courage or weakness that required. She listened without breaking in. Once she reached across the table and paused, her fingers curling halfway before drawing back. When I finished, the kettle on the stove had boiled dry. The silence hummed like an old hymn that needs no words. "I cannot say I fully understand it," she said at last, "but I see it. I see you." Those 4 words did what forgiveness never managed to do. They made me real again. We talked until darkness filled the corners of the room. She spoke of her life, parents who were kind enough, land that was steady, no children yet, but a small school where she taught others to read. I listened as if gathering gentle proof that she had truly lived all those years I had lost. When she stood to leave, the crickets were loud outside, and the air cooled along the porch rails. She took my hands in hers, her palms warm, rough, and steady. "I did not come for repentance," she said, "or blame. I only needed to see if I had a face to thank." Her words shook with a truth I could hardly carry. "Do not thank me," I said. "Just keep living as you already do. That is the only answer that matters." She nodded, small and serious. Then she leaned forward and pressed her lips lightly to my temple, the softest touch of a kiss. "Good night, Mrs. Harper." When her horse carried her down the road, I remained standing on the porch until her shape disappeared from sight. The night grew deeper, and the air smelled of wild onion and fresh-cut hay, just as it had that morning in the field long ago. I went back inside and sat at my table, the same table where I had sealed my last letter. A short pencil still lay beside it. My hands trembled, but I was able to write one final line beneath all the others. She found me too. Now the house is quiet again, as it has always been. But I am no longer waiting. If someone hears this story after I am gone, perhaps by reading one of those letters, perhaps by listening to a cracked recording of my old voice, remember this: silence keeps no one safe forever. Break it before it breaks you, because every secret, like every birth, asks for its own breath in the end.